close your eyes and imagine peace. So let's close our eyes. Let's take a few seconds and let's imagine peace. I'm going to give you, because we're going to pick up on what Kim did. Think about peace. Okay, do you have an image? Something in your mind. You're not going to have to share it, but he asked them to share it. He said, okay, give me your mental pictures of peace. So a couple of a person's like, oh, I'm thinking about this beautiful meadow with this grass and flowers blooming and a little brook bubbling through it. Another person said, I thought of a gorgeous alpine scenery with snow-capped mountains and just idyllic looking. And another person, oh, I just thought of a lake, a still lake in the fall when it reflects the colors of the trees and all that. And so that bunch of people shared, and he says, now I want you to notice something. Every person's picture of peace does not have people in that picture. Any of you have a picture of peace that was with kids, or I mean not just kids, but any adults? Guess it wouldn't happen with kids, huh? Andrea, come give us a testimony. So he commented, when we imagine peace, the first thing that we do is eliminate everyone else. Now, don't get me wrong. We have to have people. We are wired social creatures that if you are living your life alone and isolated, you don't do well. You die young or younger. And so we need people, but they are a big source of stress, aren't they? Aren't they? Yes. And Nehemiah experienced a lot of that. In lots of good ways, we'll find. The wall gets finished today. Not the series, but the wall. It's going to get done in 52 days. But he just keeps running into one human issue after another of people. So Nehemiah probably felt a little bit like this Far Side cartoon. So the caption says, oh, bummer of a birthmark, Hal. I think that Nehemiah felt like he had a target on his chest. The enemies had tried to stop the work on the wall by targeting Nehemiah with attacks and distractions, rumor, intrigue, intimidation. But today, he's going to encounter infiltration. It's going to be coming through the social networks, the people networks of things. And so let's look into Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15. So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. Now, that was probably like September, is what they're guessing, because the lunar calendar doesn't always line up with our solar one. But it's sometime in September. And it's about 6 months after Nehemiah has come to the land. So obviously, if the wall was done in 52 days, they must have had some preparation time. They had to gather materials, they had to organize, they had to get the thing laid out before the project was starting. Always a good idea. And so Nehemiah, though, nevertheless, in 52 days, these people gathered, after they gathered this material, they put up a wall. Now, again, we're not talking about some little wall that you can hop over on your way to your front door. This was a gigantic, some say, like almost 40 feet tall. Like it was super wide. It could be 8 feet wide and very, so in its thickness, so they can't batter it down. So imagine in this circumference of 3 miles, let's say, of making something that tall, and some of the wall was there in little pieces, but it was a miracle of God. That's the point. How in the world did this happen without the hand of God? So verse 16 of Nehemiah 6. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. So the enemy's failure to stop the wall, all it did was reveal God's power. They kept trying this, intimidation, picking them off, attacking. None of it worked. They couldn't stop what God had in mind. And though Nehemiah and the people worked very hard and they could see it, they knew this was the hand of God. This was an act of God. There was no other explanation for what was going on. And it really intimidated them. And isn't that a great turnaround? I love that turnaround. They've been spending all this time trying to intimidate and stop the work. And the result, God works and they're intimidated. It says they became afraid. They're trembling. They're quaking. Like, if these people, God can do this, I wonder what else he could do. But a whole lot like Revelation, it doesn't seem to change how they live their life. They still go on and try to do their plan. That is, these enemies that we identified earlier. And Tobiah is going to be the big guy today that we'll talk about. It doesn't make him say, oh, you know what? Maybe this God of Israel is somebody after all. Maybe I should start thinking about that. Doesn't happen. So what we find, though, is that now Tobiah is going to turn to his social networks. Verse 17 of Nehemiah 6. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah. Now, most of these people were kind of in the land already, so there had to be some long-running social networking. And replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. Verse 18, for many in Judah were under oath to him, since, now notice this, he was son-in-law to Shechaniah, and his son, that's Tobiah's son, had married the daughter of Meshullam. Now, moreover, they kept reporting to me Tobias's good deeds and then telling him what I had said. And Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. You kind of get the feeling of what's going on. This is like, trying to break into the country club. And they have all these networks, and they have all this stuff that you come and you go, look, I've been in the community for years, and I still feel like an outsider because these big name people keep running everything. And it's all over. So this isn't just in our country or in a European country. This was in Scripture, and the very same thing is happening. The enemy had infiltrated the Jewish social ranks. And it was for the purpose of stirring up further trouble. So Nehemiah, with that target, is getting tested at another level. See, and something got to keep in mind when we're doing this stuff, and when we'll do the kids stuff here, and we do ministry to Good News Clubs and 5-day club that will happen here, not this coming week, but the next week. The enemy will find ways to try to, he'll bring a heat wave. He'll bring a rainy day. He'll bring cranky kids. Some kid will forget his medicine, and that's the kid that's the most ADHD in the history of Elma. And so all this stuff will happen because the enemy never stops working. Never stops trying to distract you, discourage you, and if that isn't working, he's now infiltrating to get the social networks to turn against you. And so don't be surprised. The enemy doesn't let up. He doesn't stop. Tobiah and the Jewish nobles are still trying to protect their power, though. This is kind of power brokering. Not that we see that in our country. There's not power brokering, right? That doesn't happen. But Tobiah had married into a Jewish noble family, into the nobility. His son had married into a different noble family. So you see all those connections going? And marrying into a strategic alliance kind of thing was a big deal in the Middle East. Solomon's wives, we think, wow, how many women does it take for this man to be happy? There were a lot of alliances. These were strategic political things to keep other countries connected to him and not attacking him. And so the same kind of idea. Shechaniah's family name that was mentioned in our verses is in the official registers of the exiles in chapter 7, that we won't be reading that long list of names. Meshullam, who's the in-laws of Tobiah's sons, they're listed in those in chapter 5 who were building the wall. Now you think they're building the wall, and then they're turning around and they're going into using their social networks to try to stop what Nehemiah is doing. Because it says they were bound by an oath to Tobiah. This very well-connected Tobiah. He's got his little political strings all working to kind of, you're an oath to me, you're married to me, you have to be, loyal to me because of the family ties, which are big deal in that culture. And then he would do whatever he could to say, make an oath. And these oaths were maybe business ties, maybe they were family, political things, maybe some of the property that had been seized and all this exorbitant interest that was lining the pockets of Tobiah so that he would be rich and be able to bribe people and pay them off. So, this is not like big news like, gosh, we've never seen anything like that. This is kind of humanity's business as usual. Line my pockets, build my power, because human social systems and allegiances want to infiltrate faith communities, even now.
Care instructions for my Gatsby, my gazpacho. Mr. Henry Chicken. Miss Attention.
Poor. Thank you, Bill. Sorry, I needed to swallow and take a few other things to get right here. At any rate, so political alliances, social systems, allegiances, friend allegiances. Now you can say, even though it breaks down, I'm going to hit on social media a little today because, a lot of what happens now, people are in tiny little silos all over the world with people that they talk to online, people they may not have ever met, and all these people influence one another. I listened to a podcast by the guy that did VeggieTales, and he gets on Twitter, and his wife and friends beg him, Phil, stay off of Twitter. But he makes these statements that inflame one side of Twitter, and so they all pile on him, and it gets so toxic. And they're saying, why are you doing this to yourself? And he goes, I was bad, I did it, I thought maybe I could convince. It doesn't work like that. The allegiances, I think this, and if you don't think this, then I'm canceling you. You are of no account. So yes, you can go look up the VeggieTale founder, Phil Vischer, and find all kinds of negative, he's a heretic, this is what our world is doing. And now we're doing it in little social media clusters, whatever. And even if you're not on Twitter, you might be on something else that you can see that happening. And I want us to think, how does that influence how we think? How does it influence how we act and our attitudes toward things? And so this is what's going on. Just because the people help put up the wall doesn't mean they're suddenly going to give up all the power brokering that they're sucked into and pulled around by. And doesn't Jesus teach us that in Matthew 25 with the parable of the wheat and the tares or the weeds, where it says they grow up and say, let's go pull out all the weeds. Nope, because you might pull out the wheat. And wait till the end of the age when their fruit comes evident, and then let the angels take care of things. God's going to sort it. But what it teaches us is the wheat and the tares before the kingdom is fully revealed grow up together in the same field. So are we surprised when we find churches have problems? Are we surprised when we can look at a history of, I think, any church and find there's been conflicts, people are mad, they leave, they tell all their friends, who then you hear this story and go, I can't believe so-and-so was treated so horribly, and then you get another side of the story, and Janice is smiling, she's going, I lived this. Because Adair is a retired pastor, by the way. And so, after a while, you either get a thick skin or you go crazy and leave, which is why a lot of pastors have left the ministry since COVID, because they finally got worn down. So our social systems can be brutal. But we can't say, well, let's just make it all go away, if only. That will happen when Jesus returns. We can't have heaven on earth right now. We can start to try to bring pieces of heaven to our world, but heaven isn't going to come down and it will someday come in magically, but right now, this is not that time. So number one on your outline, human allegiances can infiltrate God's purpose. Human allegiances infiltrate, and we think we're doing right, and our social silo network tells us, this is a good thing to do, and we do it and find out, wait, that wasn't what God wanted. That wasn't the way God wanted it done. because so many are stumbling in their Christian journey because of the influence of friends who reflect the values of the world. And someone said, well, you know what? We're in a war. And so this turn the other cheek stuff in the Sermon on the Mount, this is wartime tactics, so we can do more aggressive kinds of things. And it's like, I can't find that in the Bible. I don't find where Jesus and Paul turned aggressive to try to push back on the forces of Rome. And so our social networks can take us places we should not go. We hear things and they sound attractive, but they reveal more of the prevailing attitudes of the world than the wisdom of God. Do you ever notice that? Is it just me? Things you hear out there that they sound like, well, yeah. My oldest son goes, if I don't stand up for myself, then who will? There's one. You ever thought about that? You better stand up for yourself. Wait, now does the Scripture teach that? Because I'm very allured and brought in by that. I better stand up and protect myself. But we don't find that in Scripture. What we find is to pray for your enemies, to bless those who persecute you. What? Say nice things to somebody who just insulted me, who just stole my parking place? No, because those are a premium, evidently, in Elma. Honest, the visitor center, when we did this exercise, what is the greatest need in Elma? They said one of our top complaints is parking spaces. Sorry, I'm not a small town person. I'm like, have you been in Seattle? Or even in downtown Spokane. It's like, you drive around forever. But those are the ways that we get thinking it's about us. Evaluate the social dynamics that's going on around you. Decide who and what will determine how you think. And that input that you're getting, we talked a generation ago about watch what TV you watch. Well, yes, you do need to watch it. It's even worse. But also watch the social media you feed on. Watch the news channel and see what does it make you want to think and do after you hear that news. And not saying they're misreporting, but they selectively report. They put something out there. The clickbait idea is that you will click on your little headline with your iPhone or your Android, and then they can give you an ad that's along with the story. And so they bait you with these dramatic stories that will pull on you emotionally and direct you where they want you to go. So this isn't just something that you're like, okay, I'm going to tell my kids this or my grandkids this so they know this because I heard it this morning in church. No, I want you to think about it for you. What do you listen to? What do you feed on? How does it shape you? So here's some lessons that are in your outline. And by the way, if you didn't get one, they're at the back, and it's okay. You can get up and go get one, and I won't mind. But number one lesson, A, power without accountability leads to abuse. That absolute power. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think I might be the exception, and then I discover, oh wait, I'm not. Powerful Christians with influential supporters can create havoc in churches, because they just use the social network. They don't sit and think of it in this organized, systematic way. They just do it. Oh, I can't believe, Kim did not sing the entire hymn. And now you can tell somebody and go, oh my gosh, Elma Alliance hates hymns. And then the stuff gets out, people are dissatisfied, they get worked up. That wasn't really a criticism, Kim, it's okay.
It's okay. I'm singing what I want anyway.
Well, that's going to help. That's going to help the rumor mill go, isn't it? You heard it here. Okay, history B. History has shown time and time again that when Christians align with secular power structures, it leads to compromise. It does not turn out well. Well, if we could just, this particular political platform will just be ideal and we'll get everything done and the kingdom of God will come in. Nope, that's not how it works. God wants you to align with Him, not with a political party. Not to saying you can't have a political party, but it isn't salvation. It isn't going to change the whole world. God is. C, don't expect perfection in Christian work. They lived happily ever after will not happen until Jesus returns. Our natural our bent is to distort God's purposes and plan for our own benefits. And one more that we see in the last several decades, churches, if we could just build a new building, if we could just get this program in, if we could get greater numbers, or in our case, if we could just get a new pastor, that's not going to solve all our problems, because once we achieve that goal, once you get the building, once you get the new guy coming in, new things will come up. And it's about how you and God are going to work out things, not whether you have just the right program, and just the right buildings, just the right personnel. Not saying they don't matter. Of course they do. But that's not the bottom line. Your prime directive is to trust the Lord in all circumstances. With or without a pastor, with or without, the church lasted 300-400 years without buildings and without hired pastors, and somehow grew exponentially. So it's about Jesus. It's about God. It's not about our structures. Our structures serve that purpose. So that's point one. Human allegiances can infiltrate God's purpose. Then our second point starts with Nehemiah chapter 7. But we're going to skip to verse 4 and then go back. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not been rebuilt. So the people are afraid to live in Jerusalem because, even now you got a wall, there's vulnerability. Where there's few people in a bigger area, more bad stuff can happen. They're vulnerable, and so they're not real comfortable moving in just yet. And so Nehemiah needs to increase the population. He needs to help them feel secure. So securing Jerusalem is critical. Now also it says they hadn't built houses. And you're like, well, what are they living in? They didn't have wonderful tents that were dome-like and could shed the rain. And believe me, it gets cold. Now, they've been from April till September or March. It gets cold in Israel. It gets rainy in Jerusalem. And so they're living like, probably they put pieces of wood up, they put up rocks, but they didn't have mortar, so the wind's going to blow in through those, and Nehemiah knows. They're living in substandard houses. And we have to do something. They're just going to get grumpy when they get cold. That certainly goes that way in my house. When it's cold, I'm cold, fix it. So Nehemiah needs to quickly get the people involved in sharing responsibility for the city's welfare. Everybody needs to be involved. Now go back to verse 1 of chapter 7. So after the wall had been rebuilt and I had set the doors in place, and the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the Levites were appointed. Now who are these guys? Well, we're going to figure that out. But the wall's completed, and the natural tendency is to whew, the wall's done, kick back. Let's just have the good life. We got great feasts coming up because it's September, and that's not what we get to do, because when we drop our guard, you ever notice when something goes really well, that there's a letdown afterwards, and then you get more vulnerable? I noticed that as a youth pastor. We go on like a backpacking trip, and it was spectacular. Kids that were hardened, that opened up and such, but then you're like, depressed and you're grumpy, and the week after you're tired. That's part of it, but stuff happens. And so you might pour yourself out the week of 5-day club and then wonder why, after this great spiritual time of pouring into kids, you're feeling like you're more tempted, you're more prone to do things that you weren't doing the week before 5-day club happened. Because the enemy likes to find when we're tired, when we've done this great thing, when we're living on a high emotion, to try to pull us down. But notice what Nehemiah is doing in here. He's getting the people involved. Now he mentions gatekeepers, musicians, and Levites. You might remember, now the gatekeepers were the gatekeepers of the temple, but they're just now starting to get that temple protected. And so that isn't going to be their first and foremost thing in this particular situation, at least temporarily. But they were responsible for the security of the temple, the doors, the guards at the door kind of thing, the security guard. And the Levites were involved in making sure the temple ran smoothly, all the little things. They are kind of like the trustees. And there are a lot of sacrifices, so they have to set that up. And then musicians who would help with the worship. But what we find is that they're out at the city gate. Because Nehemiah realizes, I secure the temple, but the whole city is at risk. So he puts the Levites and the gatekeepers at the different gates all around Jerusalem. And the musicians are there. Why bother mentioning them? I kind of wonder, what if every time we're going to see when they open the city gates and close them, they sang? What if they had Kim Henderly's great-great-great-great-grandmother and grandfather were at the city gates in Jerusalem, opening those gates up every morning and singing them shut every night? Doesn't that sound great? There you go. Who needs, Alexa to play music for us, and we have people singing in our streets? So, these extraordinary situations, Nehemiah gets all these people involved. And so he's going to make sure the city gates are secure. He's going to make sure, now we'll see that they're going to open and shut the gates in verse 3. But first, verse 2, he says, I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother I practiced this a lot yesterday. Hanani, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. Nehemiah will return to Susa now. He's going back to Persia because, remember, how long will you be gone? And so he's going to go back after, now 6 months and however long to travel. And so he needs to make sure the people that are left in the city are going to be people that he can trust, because can you tell with all this infiltration, all these attacks and the insecurity, it's going to be a pretty big need. So it says in the text, he found great big hulking, strong Ibar-like people that would, those are the, make sure you get the muscle guys. And no, what are the two characteristics that he looked for? Integrity and fear of God. Integrity means that you're the same out in public as in private as you are out in public. Integer means whole number. You whole, you aren't divided, you aren't double-minded. And then it also says fear of God. Living their life as worship, they revered God. So these traits are going to be key for the leaders that Nehemiah leaves behind, because they have to resist the greed and the corruption and the power abuse that's going on, that will happen. It will happen. It says it's going to happen. So you need people that can handle it. What is going on is they need to have character and not be bribable or intimidated. Hananiah, it says, would be the commander of the citadel. That's where there are Persian troops. So he's like the chief of police. And so has to have impeccable character. And what a great choice to oversee the security. Wouldn't you love it if we didn't worry about our officials, police, and government, that they had impeccable character? Verse 3, Nehemiah says, I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. Also appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards. Some of their posts, some were at their posts and some near their own homes. So they kind of had a neighborhood watch program going. But notice his strategic plan. This is can you see how well thought through Nehemiah is? Because we've said that before. It isn't just that he prayed and was a man of integrity and character, absolutely vital. But after that, subordinate to that is he was also planned and structured and strategic in how he approached all of this. So it matters. Ordinarily, the gates of the city were open from sunrise to sunset, but Nehemiah's strategic plan is to just put it at the hottest or brightest time of the day when everybody's up and around, so there are more eyes watching what's going on, because their enemy does have a history of deception and danger. And so he wants the people to join in keeping their eye out for something that looks suspicious. So they close the gates at night. The residents are on the neighborhood watch program. And again, strategic planning was important in following up. So number 2, spiritual people counter infiltration with wise planning. Wise planning. Spirit and structure work together, but it's not parallel train tracks. Spirit is over structure. But it doesn't mean you still don't need structure. Nehemiah lived with ongoing attacks, direct and indirectly. They wanted to stop what God was doing. That was the whole point. And I want you to stop and think, look at all the opportunity for Nehemiah to misuse his power and to justify it with, but I've got to get the wall built and the people protected. So I'm just going to leverage a few people over here and threaten them and coerce them. And he didn't do that, because human power plays do not accomplish God's plan. So we too live with an awareness that the enemy is out there. As we walk with Jesus, we have a target painted on our back. And there are potential snakes in our world, aren't there? Things that creep in, slither in to try to distract you from the calling and the purposes of God. So what snakes do you want to pull out of your life that might want to take you away from God's purpose? You ever thought about that? What things out there might pull you from God's purpose, but they're going to be deceptive and subtle? And how will the attempts of the enemy infiltrate your character? And how can that become an occasion for you to say, you know what, I'm feeling tempted. I'm seeing things that I've drifted without even knowing it, and I want God to pull me back. So I'm going to press into Him. Now you would think, we're going to end with and then I'll pray after this video. It's from the Alliance, called Love Your Enemies. And you would think if you lost most of your family, you could become a very bitter person. But I want you to hear this testimony of this woman.
My name is Fali. I'm Cambodian. When I was with the Khmer Rouge, I don't see my baby for 4 years. 4 years, don't know who she was die or not. My husband was killed, my father was killed, my daughter still alive. Thank God, you know. I cannot stay without anything. No money, no family, the house is burned. I leave my country in 1980 and I arrived in France in 1981. Before believing in God, I would like to kill anybody in the Khmer Rouge. But now, God saved me. I don't think about that anymore. That's anger. It's not good. I pray to God, forgive the people who do anything wrong. I read the Bible almost every day. A little bit like that. That will make me peace in my soul. Christ came to the earth to love each other. Don't fight anymore. Finish Khmer Rouge. Jesus said, love each other like He loved the church too. But you know, the love, no action is not love. You have to do something to show the love to each other.